the first technique is just using ink. Now, I like to use the archival ink because no matter what I decide to do to the page later, the ink will stay in place. You could get a completely different look if you use distress ink because it will be water activated. This is permanent, and once it's there, it's there. So you can see that what I do is I push the ink pad onto the stamp. Sometimes I rub it around a little bit. And then I just look at it and see if it looks pretty evenly wet everywhere. Then you're going to figure out where you want it. Big background stamps are kind of difficult. I actually always stand up so that I can add enough pressure. And you want to add pressure without like wiggling the stamp, so just move your hand around. So there we go. Pretty perfect impression. And then you can always get a few. It's going to start to look faded, but I like that. It makes it kind of blend together well. And I'm going to say that that's the last one because it's really faded now. I don't ever clean my stamps when I'm just using this ink because it'll dry and won't come off. If you're using distress ink, you probably will want to clean it because the next time that you ink, it'll come off again. Though you can get interesting effects from that. But we're going to, that's the first step. Just a waterproof ink and the stamp, and you can stamp all over the page. And so since we're talking about distress inks, let's go for one. This is peeled paint. I apply it the same way all over. And actually you could, if you want, you could use a couple different colors. So I'm just going to do some blue around the edges. And so you can stamp it once while it's still pretty damp. You can't really see the blue too much, a little bit. But now what you can do is with a spray bottle, I'm just kind of letting it run around a bit so that, because it's going to be juicy now. This is not going to give you a clean impression, but it might look cool. I don't know, actually, I'm experimenting. So it's kind of like watery, but it looks cool. So to clean a stamp, like this I probably will clean before I do too much else with it, or once we're done this video. I just use an old toothbrush and do it under running water. If it seems really, like if it's something like gesso or modeling paste that, that I really want off, then I will add a little bit of like a gentle hand soap to clean it. But as I said, if you're using the archival ink, really not necessary. Okay, so we're going to let this dry. Okay, so you see that I let it dry and then I added a layer of paint, and what I used there was nickel azo gold and burnt sienna, which are both golden fluid acrylics, and then I added in some glazing medium, which helps the paint spread better and means that I can use less paint, which is good because they're expensive. So the next thing that I'm going to do is add, like, I'm going to use my stamp as a border now. And how I'm going to do that, I'm using, this is coffee, and I'm just going to ink at the edge. I'm not worried about it being like perfectly inked. And since I can get a couple impressions, I'm going to do that in random parts. And then add more ink and just, I'm going to go the whole way around. If you wanted it to be like perfect, you could block out the stamp by using a piece of paper and then stamping, and that would help you have a perfectly even look, but I'm sure by now you know that I don't care if it's perfect. I used to want everything perfect, but now I'm like, whatever. The other thing I missed in the video, you can see like these little splotches. What I did while the paint was still damp is I just spritz a little water on it, let it sit for a minute, and then wipe it up with a towel, and that's how I ended up with these splashy bits. Okay, so now I'm going to use a stencil and some distress inks to add a little more texture to my background before I move on to the next steps. Okay, so sometimes you might want to change the shape of your stamp. So here we have, it's a square, but maybe I don't want a square. So I'm going to do a circle, and I just have this I cut with, I have a circle cutter that I use for making buttons. Anything circular, or just like use a compass, draw it, and then cut it out with a craft knife. I'm just going to hold this in place and then apply my ink on top of it. Alright. It's a little harder to position it, but I don't need it to be in a particular spot. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is figure out like a image for this page. And so I have this bag. Some of these are vintage, some of the, I mean they're all old, but some of them are like very vintage. Some of them not so much. And what I'm doing is kind of auditioning them to see like if I like it against the page. I think I'm going to use these two because they kind of seem like they work well together, like they tell a story. I don't know what that story is, but yeah. So lately when I add a photograph, instead of trying gel medium, I'm just using tape. It works very well. It's not archival, but I don't care. So I have decided that I want to play around with my layout some more. I thought I was just going to tape the picture down, but now I am thinking that I should play around a little bit. And so now I'm going to show you another technique you can do with your big background stamps. I'm going to use the sepia colored ink this time, and I'm only going to ink half of this stamp. Okay, now I'm just going to stamp right on top of this photograph. And now it looks like that. Now when you ink on a glossy surface like a photograph using the archival inks, you are going to want to let it dry for about 20 minutes or so before you touch it, because if I touched it right now, it'll rub it right off, which I'm not going to do because I like how it looks. If you stamped it and did not like it, you could wipe it off right away. Like if you used a baby wipe, you could get rid of that, let it dry, try again. But I'm going to leave it just like that because I like how it looks. And I'm going to work on this other half while I am waiting for it to dry. is just gesso mixed with water, and I'm just using my hands today because it's kind of the look I want. It's kind of weathered,